careful where you live in Saginaw County, especially if people are organizing against you. Recently, I've heard black neighbors say everybody knows people are organizing against them in the black community, and nobody gives a SHIT. The object is to get him in the hospital. That way, he loses his daughter. That's the exact words of a neighbor. And it's probably the same neighbor that hacked into my glucose log app. They've been hacking my tablet regularly, probably the past, I'd say, week and a half. Uh, and somebody hacked into my glucose log app on my tablet, and now it's all screwed up, completely screwed up. Uh, it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do to me. And the the premier property management, they don't give a crap. They could care less. And somebody keeps referring, like I said, I don't know the owner of the property, but I know that my experience with the property management company has not been good. I mean, but I'm not the only one. There's a long list of negative reviews. Now, some have been deleted the past year and a half, but there used to be around 7, which is odd, but it tells me that somebody's probably deleting them. And, but, so when I'm just reading through my VA file, and I guess there's more firings there, and apparently people are blaming me, um, which is the most stupidest thing I've ever heard. It shows how mentally ill these people are. And then I see a whole bunch of, claims couldn't contact me, unable to contact, unable to schedule, a whole line of them the past week. And it's pretty obvious that they're trying to set me up to get sicker and blame me like I'm the problem. And, I'm sick of the victim shaming. I'm so sick of it. You see it all throughout Saginaw County. A lot of victim shaming. And honestly, the racial problem here makes you sick to your stomach. It really does. It really does. It makes me sick to my stomach. And people will repeatedly make sarcastic jokes or, make comments about you and hushed, whispers. I'm even sick of dealing with it even on the bus. I'm sick of it. Um, and staff at agencies, even staff at the bus. I'm tired of people retaliating against my family and organizing against us. Yes, in the black community. I'm not saying all black people, but I'm saying somebody is organizing to harm my daughter and I in the black community. Again, I'm not saying all black people, but I'm saying if somebody is. And, when we find people outside the black community, uh, generally, if we follow, a line of investigation, we'll find that somebody knows somebody from the neighborhood or from a complex we lived, or they go to somebody's church, or they're part of, the racial extremist group. They married into it, etc., etc. Or they're, part of some Pentecostal apostolic. Somebody is obviously organizing against us in the Pentecostal and apostolic community too. It just seems to be this is community organizing. People will ruin your life any way they can because there's nothing that they could do to you criminal. So they'll try to do anything they can otherwise, which is the key to financial captivity. That's a key right there. If you're not financially captive, they can't organize against you. And law enforcement won't do a thing. Matter of fact, some find it funny. Some people in the Buena Vista Police Department, repeatedly, I've found police officers that find it funny. And, you don't want to group people together by race or religion. But I'll just say that we see common pattern. And apparently, it really is now to the point of trying to kill me. And, I'm not going to go around saying that I'm terminally ill, but, I've had some issues for quite a while since coming back from the Middle East. Had some issues for quite a while, and nobody's done anything about it. I seem to do a little bit better. Um, in the Pacific, there's nothing there that makes me sick. We eat very healthy. We live off the land. Everything is fresh. Uh, but whatever it is that's been wrong with me since I came back from the Middle East, every time I come back to the States, the longer I'm here, the worse it gets. And I think it's because I have so many allergies here, it weakens my immune system. I'm not saying when I'm, in the Pacific that I'm completely healthy, but stuff seems to, it's not as strong and not as reoccurring. Things seem to be more intermittent. And even the Middle East, as long as I could stay away from dust storms, um, and if I'm in the desert, protect my my skin, my breathing, my airways. Um, the stuff there seems to be more relegated to my ears, nose, throat, my eyes, and digestive issues. But again, even there, um, everything's fresh. Um, I mean, where I would shop, all the vegetables are fresh. Like within a day or two, they're locally grown, and when they're not, stuff is flown in daily. That's one thing about the Middle East. A lot of stuff is flown in because they have that capability because the economy there, and people don't know it, but especially in Kuwait, the people have like warehouse-based gardens all throughout the desert. They're all over the place, and little patches of land that where people settle, and they make gardens. Even for just their family. So there's stuff all throughout the desert, and the food, the meat, also the meat and the fish also is fresh. They have that capability there. That's very helpful. But I'm not saying that I'm never sick there. Just and less stress too. I've found even in the Middle East and in the Pacific Rim, less stress um, from dealing with stuff. I always thought Michigan was my home, but I don't think so anymore. I really don't. The amount of confrontational attitudes here and the racial tension in Michigan, when people talk about unity, it's garbage. The racial tension here is the worst I've ever seen. And so far, we've lived in two different counties since we came back, and the racial tension is as worse as ever. The talk of unity is garbage. It's not true, especially when dealing with my family. And if part Asian, part white here, you're you're still treated like the hated white people, the hated white man. And if you're a single father with daughters, your daughters are treated like the hated white daughters of the white man. Even though when people look at you, do I look like a typical white man? But that being said, you know, people are trying to kill me, through negligent care, through ignoring me, through saying, oh, we couldn't get a hold of him, or oh, we couldn't schedule a test because he has an issue with this or this. The victim shaming again and again. The Saginaw VA makes me sick to my stomach. How many veterans have they killed? How many veterans has the blue team killed? How many single fathers have been killed and their children put into the system to be trafficked? First, trafficked by social workers. I don't like social workers. I'm very hesitant about any of them. My experience that we've seen the past 8 years, I'm very hesitant to deal with any of them because I've found many of them claiming to be, like clinical social workers, like clinical mental health or clinical triage for, homelessness or poverty. And they're abusive. They hold things over their clients. And some of them like to retaliate. And some of them could care less what happens to their clients. They could care less. And some of them have used the homeless and the welfare system as a way to hurt people. Um, and I'm not going to label all social workers again. I don't approach people like that. I believe, regardless of people's education background or their religion or their race, essentially, people make their own decisions most of the time. But you get people, that, they get it, they will, maybe their family or the social networks they travel, they could be racially or religiously high demand, being as you have to follow a certain line, and this is how you have to treat people and approach people. Otherwise, you're out of the group. Yeah, there are people like that. I've encountered that here. Um, but essentially, I believe people will make individual decisions. I've encountered people all over the world. I don't buy any racial or national rhetoric that, defines people. It's garbage. But there are people that will place themselves and allow themselves to be placed within a high demand group. Like I've encountered Americans always have stereotypes about us Asians. Always. Oh, they all think alike. They can't separate themselves from the group. It's hogwash. It's not true. If you understand Asian culture, you understand how people are individualistic within their own culture, within their, even against the grain of their own family. But, um, there are people who will place themselves in a particular situation, their family, their social networks, their job, their religion, and they will allow themselves to become. Sorry, it's one of my issues. I believe it's Sjogren's, dry mouth, dry eyes, and other issues. It's also connected to autoimmune, like psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. There's certain things that seem to go along with that, but of course, the VA, they're dragging their feet um, about it. This has been an issue that I've been trying to get looked at within Bay and Saginaw counties when I've come back throughout the year since 2014. I mean, I've come back twice. Um, this time it's been several years, but nobody will look into it. If you have autoimmune and you're in mid Michigan, I mean, I'm meeting people that I didn't know it, but when I worked at a call center, I worked with a lot of people with autoimmune. I didn't know it back then, but a lot of people, and it seems to be hit and miss if you get good care. So when the city council of Saginaw talks about a medical mall, you know, I really am hesitant. You know, Covenant has apparently stepped up. It looks like Covenant may be taking over the VA. Some of the positions there will become, strictly Covenant. I mean, that's the way it looks. And Covenant has a kind of an alliance with CMU. Now, I support tribal colleges. I mean, 1,000%. The thing is that CMU has animosity with state and with U of M. Um, so that means that, and with Wayne State, but Wayne State's kind of their own beast in the state. They're way down there in Detroit on their own. But it's a new medical school. To take on severe health issues, and to have patients relying on them for very serious issues that need um, a big background in the academic research. I mean, I hope if I'm right, it turns out well. But the thing is, to have an animosity, especially with I mean, Michigan State, they have a lot to offer as well because they have two medical schools, allopathic and osteopathic, along with uh, U of M, with a very, very long and heavily credentialed academic background in medicine. Um, Hopefully, they will increase those alliances because if they're going to become the main focus of care for mid Michigan, um, yes, CMU, they have to prepare. You know, they really do because if they're going to, if I'm right, and they're going to be the the primary medical apparatus for taking over operations at the VA. Again, if I'm correct, they'll be stepping into those positions. While the VA, I mean, there was the past what 8 years. They've been talking about trying to shrink the VA workforce and have private, medical, um, private medical HMOs or hospitals step in and fill the void. Of course, definitely Republican, but the Democrats have stepped on. They've stepped into it too. By trying to increase funding and creating more legislation so that veterans would be able to take advantage of that. They would have the funding to step farther away from the VA and distance themselves from the VA and more into the private sector. I mean, which if the funding is there, I mean, that's great, you know. Um, supporting local clinics and local hospitals. Um, if the academic background is there. Um, Otherwise, you're giving veterans who statistically have complex medical issues and they have long histories of complex medical issues. We're giving their care to to medical to clinics or to hospitals or HMOs, that are not prepared for it, and that could be a disaster. The 22 a day could go up. Of course, it wouldn't be a legitimate 22 a day. The veterans would be we'd be losing veterans because of negligent care. But I mean, just the fact of the matter is, we would be losing more veterans daily uh, because their medical issues aren't being addressed because their providers aren't prepared and they're inequipped to be able to empathize and understand and to give good medical care. You'll see more frustrated caregivers than you do caregivers that are equipped and able, and they have the academic background to take care of veterans medical care. And it does take a very certain kind of medical provider, whether nurse practitioner or a PA or a doctor. Um, it takes a certain kind of provider because you have layers of medical issues, and if somebody has been to Vietnam, you have a Vietnam veteran, or you have a PACT Act. Well, I mean, PACT Act covers both, but or you have a Middle East deployed veteran, or actually Africa too deployed veteran. You're going to find layered and very complex medical issues, and some providers can't handle it. They get frustrated, or they ignore stuff, or they write stuff off, and buy into the whole anti-veteran rhetoric that it's in their head or they're mentally ill, and then they get turned over and referred to psych, to psychiatry or psychology. So hopefully, if I'm right, it goes well and people are properly prepared. From what I've seen, I'm not very impressed. My daughter and I have gotten poor medical care. Um, and the good medical care we've gotten has been intermittent, which when you have, complex issues that are sometimes layered, especially as a PACT Act veteran where stuff is connected, like Gulf War syndrome, you may be looking at chronic inflammation, uh, through organ systems. The same time you're looking at neurological issues, and then connected to that, you're looking at spinal issues, which sometimes spinal issues, if somebody doesn't dig, they could dismiss the neurological issue as, oh, it's spinal, but it's not. Then you could add in diabetes. The most common, I've been learning the past year, the most commonly misdiagnosed thing is anything related to diabetes. Diabetes type 1, type 2, LADA, or brittle diabetes. Brittle, or what's it called? Lapid diabetes, which is diabetes that is very difficult to control. People write it off. Oh, they're like, oh, it's type 1. You were just never diagnosed. Or people will say, oh, you have type 2, but it's LADA, which is um, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, which is in and of itself complex because it has characteristics of type 1 and type 2. And if somebody has brittle diabetes, which is the diabetes that you can't control, 1 minute you're spiking, and the doctor says, oh, you're hypoglycemic. And then a month down the road, all of a sudden your sugar's crashing. Or, I mean, not, yeah, no, spiking. Spiking 1 minute, and people are like, oh my gosh, she's in a hyperglycemic crisis. Sugar's too high. Got to get insulin. And many times, these people with brittle diabetes, they'll have multiple hospitalizations, um, and they because they'll have hypoglycemic events where the sugar crashes. Then other times they'll have hyperglycemic glycemic events where their sugar is too high and they require, emergency insulin treatment. Um, this is the most dangerous kind, but people can live with it if they have an educated provider. And then you add into something like um, LADA, LADA, which is again latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, which is also complex because it can be mistaken for type 1 or type 2. And it can also sometimes be mistaken for brittle. So things can get very complicated, and the veteran may not get good care. And then also, sometimes people will mistake neurological issues, especially peripheral issues. Of, oh, you're having diabetic neuropathy. Oh, yeah, your feet and your hands are having problems. But it may not be. If you have an autoimmune, it could be something like Raynaud's um, or Sjögren's. And then if you have diabetes added into that, oh, it's even more complex. So medical providers have to be prepared for this, which means they gotta know their stuff. And so for us diabetics and us PACTAC veterans, um, the more that I'm reading, I have, um, I'm not, I'm not super intelligent. You know, I mean, my IQ is healthy. I have a, I guess I have a good memory sometimes. No, I have a fairly good memory most of the time, unless my sleep apnea is, I'm having a sleep deficit. That's about the only thing that affects my memory, unless I have a migraine. So I read a lot, and I'm seeing a lot of very complex stuff, and it's surprising. It's surprising, and autoimmune and diabetes and neuropathy, all of these things are tied in, and if a medical provider and the patient is not on point in reading and pay attention to symptoms and reading what's going on in the latest research, they will put you in the hospital. And these things, if you wait and your care is delayed, like it's happened to me, things will worsen quickly. I mean, look at me. I went from pre-diabetes to some kind of diabetic presentation in only a matter of the pancreatitis started last October, last November, and within this amount of time, I'm now diabetic. Um, but my kind of diabetes could be LADA or it could be brittle diabetes, but without a provider that's educated and somebody that's willing to make tests regularly. I'm finding with the Saginaw VA, they only want to do tests when it puts them in danger of getting fired or looking like they're responsible. The tests are so intermittent, so, nothing gets done. And sometimes you'll find radiologists or pathologists that they uh, they don't pay attention to detail. I've even found in my some of my radiological reports that they don't pay attention to detail. If somebody has, like, for example, if you know a little bit about skeletal um, medicine, musculoskeletal, a bone spur is called an osteophyte. If you have an osteophyte, you can't it's impossible to have no effect on your soft tissues because the very nature of these, it's kind of like throwing a rock, and a rock literally inside, if you know about cars, throwing a rock, a good sized rock, inside your axle where the wheel bearings are. It's impossible for this rock to be in there without affecting the bearings, affecting the grease, and affecting the inside of the axle as this rock slowly gets worn down. And you take this idea, guys should be able to understand that. You take that and you apply, well, I don't want to say all guys, some guys could care less about cars. But you take that idea and you apply it to your joints, the same thing holds true. So when a radiologist says, oh, yeah, somebody has multiple osteophytes or bone spurs in their knee and their spine, this is especially dangerous in your spine. You know, if you have lots of bone spurs in your spine, eventually it's going to start pushing in on what's called the dural sac, which is the sac that holds a bundle of nerves. Think of some tech movie where you're looking at a bunch of fiber optic cable for some kind of, really heavy duty computer network. And you'll see all these fiber optic wires. There's just hundreds of them. And you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, hope I never have to splice into that. That's your spine. And you have a sac around it with fluid that keeps it moist. And this fluid is filled with stem cells, but it's also filled with liquid that helps support the connectivity of your spine, which is basically a very advanced fiber optic circuit. Fiber optic can also take electricity, which is why we can do so much nowadays with fiber optic cabling. But the spine or the fluid inside that sac, it helps preserve and it helps conduct um, the neuroelectric signals that go up and down your spine. So the more things you have pushing on that sac, it increases pressure, and over time it can start to push them together too closely. So you have problems of wires um, or fiber optics that are so close together that they may start to wear on each other. And once that covering of those nerves starts to wear away, then you start to get crossed signals, or you get nerves that are pinched so no signal can go down, or decreased signal. And that's how you get things like paralysis, organ failure, because the nerves aren't properly conducting messages back and forth. And then if you increase pressure in the system, then it affects the brain and it affects the brain stem. Then it starts to affect the very vital functions of your body. So these are dangerous in your spine. And if you have them in other joints, your knees, which support weight, think of having that um, big old heavy duty truck with big old giant tires, and throw 3 or 4 rocks inside the axle, and then imagine what happens, especially if it's carrying a weight. Imagine a semi that's pulling a trailer with with logs, and then it multiple tires has those rocks inside the axles. Think of the kind of things that happen. That's what happens to your body. And eventually those soft tissues wear away, they get torn. That's how you get torn meniscus, torn ACLs, because these osteophytes, these bone spurs are in there. And once you start getting bone on bone, that's the point when the rock, the osteophyte, starts to wear away. And then you get all of this grind out bone inside the knee, and then you get inflammation, and then certain kinds of arthritis, you'll get fluid retention. Things only get worse from there. So, if a radiologist isn't paying close attention to soft tissues, um, it just doesn't, it wouldn't make sense if somebody has multiple osteophytes and they have fluid retention on the knee. that your soft tissues are not affected. It wouldn't make sense medically. And one of the key things of the rheumatoid and psoriatic arthritis is that these soft tissues are affected over time. They wear down, they tear, and eventually they disappear. That's when the bone starts getting ground into, get pockets. Then your body pushes fluid in there to try to keep a cushion, because its key is to have the cushion. Otherwise, the heat in there goes up. You get ground bone, which um, is like again like throwing gravel or worn out stone that's that ground down into the fluid of the knee or into the fluid of the axle, and eventually it starts to grind everything down. Then you need a knee replacement. So when it comes to, and this is the same for lupus and for several other joint disorders. Believe it or not, there's autoimmune is the most common thing that autoimmune diseases attack is the joints. Very common. Not just lupus, psoriatic arthritis, and rheumatoid arthritis. There's multiple pathologies that will attack the joints. But the key to finding exactly what kind of pathology is inflammation. There's a few tests that test for inflammation. Now, if you have heavy duty inflammation, that tells you that it's a cluster of different pathologies. But if you don't have a provider that knows how to test for them, or they don't want to spend the money, like it's their money, um, I think the worst kind of physician is a conservative physician. They don't want to spend the money for insurance. They don't want to spend the money for Medicaid uh, to investigate somebody's medical issue. They don't want to spend the money, and the only way you're going to know is by investigating. And sometimes to get to the bottom of something, it requires a lot of testing. And if you're hit and miss what labs you use, you're hit and miss what kind of testing levels are used, you're hit and miss as far as the ranges that are used, you're not going to get good care. One of the reasons why I don't like a Roop and Quest, I think there's other labs besides them, but they have the worst testing ranges, and they have a pattern of very narcissistic and very profit-centric care paradigms that they don't take care of the patient. The patient's not the focus. The profit margin is, and them holding to how their tests are better than everybody else's. The worst kind of doctor or lab is a narcissist. Narcissists are worse at anything, but medical care for another person or a lawyer actually a narcissistic lawyer, that would probably be pretty good. They would be a shark. But so exclude that. But a narcissistic social worker, a narcissistic nurse, or a narcissistic doctor, or a narcissistic psychiatrist, that's the worst right there, because they're going to ignore. You're dealing with social science, first of all. Um, not not quite as bad as a narcissistic clinical mental health social worker, but pretty bad, uh, because a psychiatrist has a lot more scientific background, a lot more knowledge with testing and with metrics than a clinical social worker does. But either one that's narcissistic, they're going to focus less on the evidence base, less on the testing of a psychological issue, and they're going to depend more on their own opinion with a clinical judgment call. So that's why you get people saying, "Oh, I think you're schizophrenic." When you hear the word "I think," that tells you right there, "Oops, I may be dealing with a narcissist." Somebody that wants to ignore all the testing out there. There is so much testing out there for mental health issues. So much. For anybody to say that it's not needed If you're their patient, walk out of the office. I'm telling you, just this is as a psychologist. I'm a research psychologist. You know, um, community-driven graduate program with a school. Allowed me this opportunity, and uh, and I took it. I didn't go with the clinical route because of the length of time. I was going to later. In a PhD program, a lot of PhD programs. On the way to the PhD, you'll get the appropriate classes for licensure, um, especially when you walk in with a master's. So after your second or third year under the way to your PhD, you'll have the stuff you need so you can get licensed. But because of what happened with HUD Vash, I wasn't able to go into a PhD program, which apparently HUD Vash is trying to get involved, along with people retaliating at the VA. I saw a note in my file about a mental health treatment coordinator not required. More retaliation. But anyway, so if you're not getting good care, I kind of got off on a tangent talking about all this stuff. But so if you're not getting good care when it comes to um, mental health or anything neurological or joint related, um, and you're not getting the scientific, testing, and you're just being diagnosed by what somebody thinks, walk away. And the Saginaw VA has really shortchanged my care. Um, I would argue in court that, despite being deployed to the Middle East as long as I was there, a long time, um, if they would have been more aggressive with treating my pancreas, they've known about it since I walked out of the hospital. If they would have been more aggressive, maybe I wouldn't be diabetic now. But they haven't done anything. I'm still waiting for a liver MRI. Still, they've done 4 ultrasounds. Four. Ultrasound of a liver really gives you very little. Very little. Oh yeah, we have signal intensity. That's how the sound waves how they bounce back on your liver. If it's slightly different, then you need to go further and do an MRI because it could be different fibers, or it could be different thickness, or it could be tumor related, or abscesses. You don't know. That's why you go into the MRI. But and also with the pancreas, if you're having a swollen pancreas, um, there's a couple of kind of diabetes, autoimmune diabetes, where the different cells of your body, your immune system, they start to attack insulin, and they start to attack the cells of the islet. The islet is a little area in your pancreas that creates insulin. It's a small area. I think it's probably about maybe the size of my thumb, maybe a little bigger. But if anything happens to that islet, it affects insulin production. Your body can grow resistant. All of this is related to different kinds of diabetes. And if your pancreas isn't properly assessed and you have repeat pancreatitis, they say, oh, your triglycerides are high, thinking the triglycerides are the causality because they don't want to investigate. It may not be that fact. It may be that high triglycerides are a symptom of something else, namely being your your um your pancreas is being attacked by your immune system. So, I mean, anyway, I jumped, into this stuff in depth, but my main topic was the fact that the VA, and the organizing against me here in Saginaw County, may put me in a hospital, and nobody's ever really shown the care they could about the future of my children, especially my daughter that's here. Um, other videos about comments about my daughters in the Philippines by people who may travel from here to there, or they may have friends there. And I really think that my daughter is in danger of being trafficked. My daughter here by the social welfare system, the child welfare system. And, there's some foster parents around Saginaw County and some foster parents in Michigan that should not be foster parents. And you got some people with such, um, far be it extended connection, remote connection, but still should never have those connections to people involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking. Foster parents should never have those connections. Never. Or people involved with extremist groups or involved with churches trying to get kids from certain families to their kids or to their parents from their churches. That's human trafficking. But these are my children. This is the risk because people are targeting me. But nobody would do anything about it because, as I repeat all the time, and so do even some of the bus drivers and people around, our neighborhood. Money is no object. Money is no object to target that guy. And, no money will be wasted putting him in a home. Nobody cares about the kids. Uh, Somebody will step up. People have even said somebody will step up with the kids. Yeah, step up to do what?